Hello, sweet friend. So I want to tell you a story. These are crazy times that we're going through. And there's riots on the street and everybody's concerned. And one of the things that I've been hearing is a lot of people who are rightly concerned, saying, this is like Nazi Germany. That's what's happening. It's like Nazi Germany. And I understand that. Like, I really do. And I understand the reasons for it, and I share the concerns that such people have. I'm worried about the increase in totalitarian governments across the world. I really am. I've been worried about them for 20 years. But I don't think that's the right part of history that we should be learning from right now. And I don't think that what's going on is actually like 1930s Germany too much at all. And I'm going to explain why. I think what we're going through right now is actually like nothing that we've been through before in human history. And if it is like any of the chapters that we've been through, then it's not like anything that we went through in the 20th century. None of it. It's not like anything we went through in the Industrial Revolution. It's not like anything we went through in the Dark Ages. And it's not like anything that happened at the time when Jesus was born. It's like nothing that we've experienced in all of that time. But it is like something that we've been through before. And there's this incredible chapter of history that we seem to have forgotten, that nobody is talking about. And that chapter of history takes place 1200 BC, right? And that sounds like it's going to be really dull, doesn't it? As soon as you hear the date, you're like, nothing interesting happened 1200 BC. But you'd be really wrong, because the most significant event in the most significant collapse, the largest crisis that civilization has ever passed through, happened at that particular time. And it makes the collapse of the Roman Empire look like a relatively small affair, right? So it's this huge, enormous, epoch-ending time in history, right? And you've got all these large civilizations, like the Egyptian civilization and the Babylonians and the Akkadians and all the Middle East, right? It's 1200 BC. It's not the Stone Age. It's the Bronze Age, right? We've got ziggurats and temples. We've got warfare and literacy. We've got great poetry. You've got trade across a connected ancient world, right? You've got massive trade moving across all of this area. It's thriving, right? There's wisdom and culture and the arts and poetry, diplomacy, all of this stuff. And then, poof, it all goes down. Whole civilizations, whole languages, whole cities, enormous big cities, abandoned, emptied, finished, just winked out. Bam, 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 like that, one after the other, 1200 BC. How did this happen? That's why this is the conversation to have. How did that happen? What happened at that time, right? Did they have a kind of Hitler kind of like character and bad actor, or was there some sort of, no, it wasn't like that. That's not what happened, at least not just. What happened was many things, and so that's the most important thing. Is that what happened wasn't one thing, was many things. So this is really important. The many things crossed all sorts of different areas. We suffered from systemic collapse that moved across so many different areas of our activity. But one of the areas that I want to start the story off with here is a drought. And I was reminded of all of this story this morning because I woke up with the rains and I could feel the earth drinking here, and I was reminded that the bushfire season that we're coming into is less likely to be ravaging my neighbourhood because of these beautiful rains. And so at this time, 1200 BC, they got a drought. Not just any drought, a drought that lasted and lasted and lasted. It lasted a year. It lasted 5 years. They thought that it would finish. It lasted a decade. Then after that decade, it lasted another decade, and then another, and then another, and then another. It lasted a century in some areas. A century of drought. Not a year, not two, but a century. And after a couple of years, then of course the crops failed. And when the crops failed, then the people were hungry. And when the people were hungry, then they started to march on the streets. And then some people were displaced. They had to move from the area that they had been. They had to go somewhere else. Those people were ecological refugees or political refugees. They were economic refugees. There was all sorts of fighting. There was all sorts of change, right? Soon there was wars. At the same time as all of this, with people's immune system being down and their nutrition being down and populations moving, there was diseases that took place as well. On top of that, in the lead up to it, there had been significant technological change. It was a time of technological innovation. They'd come up with powerful new technology, and some of that powerful new technology was weaponized. It was turned into chariots, it was turned into swords, it was turned into better ways to be able to oppress and kill each other. So we've got a series of changes happening all at the same time. We've got technological expansion with ecological change or collapse, right? Now, was that ecological collapse because of us chopping down all of the trees at that time? Perhaps. Or was it just one of Gaia's great cycles? We don't know. I suspect that it was all of the deforestation that happened, you know, that the Babylonians and everyone did. Either way, the point is that for those civilizations that had existed, not like our civilization, you know, like that we would trace for some hundreds of years, we've got empires, dynasties that last thousands and thousands of years. Is huge, well-established cultures that go ploof and disappear. We enter a dark ages, the first dark ages that lasts hundreds and hundreds of years, and literacy almost disappears in large areas of the ancient world. And all of this happens not because of one thing, but because of many things. And so you've got political, economic, cultural, community, health, farming, agricultural and ecological changes all taking place at the same time, right? But so we've got changes in the environment, but the primary change that sets it all up is that ecological change, that drought. That's the thing that got the ancient world shaking. And then once it was shaking, then they became their own worst enemies and they made it shake more and more and more. Now, why do I think that this is the conversation that we need to be having now? I think that that's exactly what's happening today. I think that if we just politicize what's going on in relation to COVID, then we're not having the right conversation. We're going to get more divisive. We're just going to argue. Should I wear my mask in this room or in the pool or not? Wrong conversation. Wrong conversation, I think. The conversation is that we are on the precipice of major changes here. We're seeing all the same kind of things happening that was happening at that time. There's huge changes in technology. We've got AI and and crypto and all of these things happening, right? But most importantly, we're mismanaging our environment. That's how come I was able to predict COVID. That's how come 2 years ago I said that I think after the bushfires we would see novel viral epidemics coming. And I was right, because those changes follow. The ecological changes give rise to virological changes. The virological changes give rise to political changes. The political changes give rise to economic changes. The economic changes give rise to psychological changes. And it all goes round and around and around and around. It's like global warming. There's feedback loops. They bounce off each other and they bounce off each other and they bounce off each other. And so only when we've got a historical example that is big enough, like the collapse of the Bronze Era, do I think that we have a chance of being able to have an intelligent and constructive conversation about what to do about our current state of affairs. Not just what to do about COVID, not just what to do about your immunization status or your human rights. You know, those are important conversations. But also what to do about the future direction of life on this planet and the possibility of very significant economic and ecological collapse. right? It's only inside that conversation that I think we have a chance of being able to come to somewhere that is fruitful here in our dialogue. And therefore, what we do best as humanity is we can adapt, and we can use this crisis as a crisitunity, as an opportunity to come together, to say this is the thing, this is the great tragedy for me of our age of COVID, is that what should have brought us together has rent us apart, that we feel that all the way down into our friendships and marriages and families. We feel those changes. But it's not all bad news, because off the back of the dark ages that the collapse of the Bronze Era gave rise to, then there was another age that's called the Axial Age. And the Axial Age was a pivot. That's why it's called the Axial Age. And in this time, every single spiritual and religious idea that you have ever heard of emerged. It emerged in response to the dark ages that we experienced after that collapse. It means that if you the Buddha, Zoroaster, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Pythagoras, Thales, every ancient Greek thinker that you could ever think of, all of this philosophy, all of it, right? It all emerged in the wake after the collapse of the Bronze Era. And all of that wisdom was all pointing somewhere kind of similar. It said polarity, and a polarity is apparent, but not fundamental. That below the rights and wrongs, the goods and bads, the hots and colds, the whites and blacks, there's this vast ocean that unites us. And that's reality. And we partake in it. It's not just that we partake in the unity of the earth, but we partake in the unity of consciousness itself, is what the thinkers of the Axial Age told us. And I think that that is the kind of story that we need to be reminding of ourselves of right now, so that we can focus more deeply on the crisitunity that we're facing, and that we can use it to make a world that works for everybody. That's all I have to say on this gorgeous rainy day.